Hello, this session will deal with consumer markets and buying behavior. Now, why would we investigate buying behavior? Well, it's quite simple actually, because if we know the behavior of people, then we can try to take advantage of it in our design of strategy and design of our marketing mix. So if we can understand how people think, feel and react when they see an advertisement, for example, or when they hear something, when they smell, taste, sense some stimuli, then we can use it in developing our strategy and the marketing mix. So understanding what stimulates our customers means that we can actually then start to understand how the customers react, and this means that we simply have a model of what we call stimuli, organism and response. And this model of stimuli, organism and response is something that we'd like to take a closer look at. So in this case, we would focus at the consumer, and we would try to illustrate that consumer with this little circle with, you could say, eyes and a happy little smile. That would be our consumer. So what is it that the consumer does? Well, the consumer has a reaction. As you can see over here, we have a reaction here, and the consumer's behavior and the reaction actually is the same, because the consumer ends up reacting by choosing a specific product, as we can see here. They choose a specific brand, they choose where to buy, they choose when to buy, and they also choose how much to buy. So that's the reaction of the consumer. Now, one of the interesting questions is that when we're focusing at this consumer here, what is it that make this consumer react in this particular way? Well, here we find that the process here, the consumer process, consists of 5 different phases. And we have a problem recognition, where the consumer recognizes, yes, I'm hungry, or yes, I need a new car to get from A to B, or yes, I would like to go on vacation. And these problem recognitions or need recognitions eventually leads to the consumer trying to search for some information that would help the consumer to find out, how can I fulfill my needs? Having found lots of different information, maybe information about, as we could see here, the different products, the different brands, different dealers, the consumer start to figure out, okay, how do I evaluate these different options? And therefore there will be different criteria. Some consumers might buy based on just one single criteria, others might put weights on them in order to have a more equal buying in the end. And then they decide the purchase here. That would be after the evaluation, and that means that they decide on the choice of product, the brand, where to buy, when to buy, how much to buy. And when the consumers have bought, then they have what we call a post-purchase behavior. Means this is where they evaluate, are we actually kind of satisfied with our buying? So then this consumer, the process itself, the decision process, is, as we can see over here, is based upon the characteristics of the consumer. And what characterizes a consumer? Well, we have some different areas that we would take a closer look at. These are cultural areas, for one, because we all live in a specific culture where we can, or where we are affected by the culture we live in. So therefore the culture, the society, religion, etc. has a great influence on how and who we are. Other things that will have a great impact on how we decide what to buy and what to buy, brands and products, etc., are our reference groups. What kind of groups are we members of? Which groups would we like to be members of, and which groups do we not want to be members of? These can also influence the way we end up buying. And of course our status in the family and the roles and the status that we have. Then there are more personal things like the age. There's a difference between being 15 and being 50. So of course the age in itself will have an influence on how do we as a consumer decide what to buy. And of course, where are we in our life cycle? Are we just starting to have a family, or are our oldest kids, have they left the home, so we are alone again? So lots of things here in these personal areas can affect it. Also occupation, economic circumstances, how much money do we have available, what is our lifestyle, what's our personality, and how do we perceive ourselves. And then we have the last part, or the last one, which have a direct influence on our consumer decision process, which are the psychological areas. And we have here motives. That means the consumer's motives, the perception that the consumer have of life, on products and everything. And what about learning? How does the consumer learn? What are the consumer's attitudes, and what are the consumer's beliefs? So these are all areas that will have, as you can see here, part of influencing the consumer's decision process, and we may not always understand it. But the important thing here is to notice that we have here the O, the organism, which is the consumer, and everything that goes on in here ends up with a response over here, ending with the product choice, brand choice, where to buy, when to buy, and how much to buy. Now, not only do we have these things that we can find here in our organism, we also have some stimuli that we find over here. And these stimuli can be characterized by two, you could say, general stimuli. Well, the first general stimuli would be the overall macro environmental stimuli, which is the political environment that we live in, the economic environment, the sociocultural, technological, environmental, and the legal environment. And then, of course, some stimuli, that other general stimuli that you also know of, all of us, are the marketing stimuli, where we know that we have product, price, place, and promotion, which is the marketing mix from, for example, our company, or it could be from other companies. And if it is a service, we would add, of course, people, physical evidence, and processes. So, the better we understand the stimuli, organism, and response, the better decisions we can make regarding our marketing mix. And that's one of the reasons that we are really wanting to investigate the buying behavior of consumers. This also means that external analysis is something that includes buying behavior, and therefore the analysis of consumers' buying behavior is great input to strategy and to marketing mix. So having this input from the analysis to our strategy and the marketing mix, we need to take a closer look on some other issues regarding consumer buying behavior. There's a person called Henry Assaels. He has investigated how is it that consumers buy, and he has some interesting thoughts about how do we investigate when we are being in a situation where we are going to buy products. So let's take a closer look at his theory. Henry Assaels is discussing two factors that influences buying behavior. He's talking about that consumers can actually see differences between brands, and they can also be more or less involved. Basically, let's see what he means by that. Well, being involved, we can either be highly involved in the buying, or we can be low involved in the buying. And the other dimension was about differences between brands. Well, some might be able to see differences between different brands, and others may not see differences between brands. So Henry Assaels put these together, as you can see here, and that leaves us with 4 quadrants, where we will take a closer look at each of those one by one. Let's start with the one of high involvement and significant differences between the brands. Now in this quadrant, Henry Assaels tells us and that we should look into what he calls complex buying behavior. And also, as you can see, he is interested in helping us to understand that first we produce a product opinion because we can see differences and we are highly involved, so we spend time and energy in investigating the product or the service. And since we can see differences between the different brands, we can create a product opinion before we create an attitude and before we buy. Means that as a consequence to those guys who would like to market to these areas, they would have to come up with some serious communication about their own products, and probably also personal sales, print media, and everything that will support the customer being able to create the product opinion. So that was the first one, the complex product, or the complex buying behavior. The next one, low involvement. This is where we are not really involved in the product, but we can still see the differences between the brands. And therefore we create a product opinion, and then we buy, and then we probably create an attitude. The next one is about having quite a high involvement in the product, but we can't really see the differences between the different brands. To some consumers, this might be consumer products like PCs. Some will be quite involved in it, but they're not really capable of seeing differences between the different brands. So they would very often buy, and then they would create an opinion about the product, and then they will create an attitude, whether it's being positive or negative regarding that particular product. Now the last one here is what we call habitual buying behavior. This is where we are not really involved, and we can only see few differences between the brands. And very often we find ordinary consumer goods like salt, pepper, sugar, etc. to be down here. And this is where we have a passive product opinion, we buy and then we evaluate. And only if something goes wrong, we will probably try to change the product choice that we have. So all of these, you find them here. We have 4 different: complex buying behavior, variety seeking, dissonance reducing buying behavior, and habitual buying behavior. And all of these end up with having a different kind of process. We'll look into that in just a while. So the 4 different buying behaviors leads to different buying processes, and here it's important that we go back and see what is the buying process. Well, as we remember, the buying process was problem recognition, information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase decision, and a post-purchase behavior. Now the first one, problem recognition. As we know, it's about need that arises within oneself. We might actually be exposed to some promotion that will create a need with us, or help us to understand that okay, I need this one, or I like to have it. Friends could be influencing us in order to buy specific products. Now the next one, information search. Where do we search for information? If we have a specific need for, let's say, a car, well, we could use the internet. We could use and thereby using the internet to search for car dealers and car producers advertising or information about the cars. We could use newspapers, magazines, TVs, friends, salespeople. Lots of sources can be used in order to get information about a car if we would like to buy new cars. Then evaluation of the alternatives. Well, some might say that only the color of the car would be quite important, and others would say, well, the color is quite important, but we also need to look into the horsepower, and we need to look in whether it's environmentally friendly, etc. So there are different ways of evaluating these alternatives of buying a car. And the purchase decision, well, a car probably, well, most people would buy only one, but they would certainly decide on where are we going to buy it, when do we want to buy it, and what kind of brand would we like to have. And then looking into the post-purchase behavior in the process means that, okay, are we satisfied or not? And then what kind of actions do we want to take if we are satisfied or if we are not satisfied? So this is the buying process that we go through as well. And this buying process, as you remember it from our overview, leads to the different reactions that we have. Means where do we buy, how do we buy, etc. So having the buying process and having Assaels different kinds of buying situations means that Assaels' idea is that if we have a complex buying behavior, then we will, as a consumer, go through all 5 phases here, because we are highly involved and we can see differences. So we will certainly search for information, we would evaluate the alternatives, and we will make the purchase decision, and we will also make a post-purchase behavior. Now, if we have a habit, a habitual buying behavior, let's say that you are missing out on toilet paper, you would probably recognize that you are missing toilet paper, but not a lot of people would actually start searching for information. They would simply just add it to their list. So the next time they were shopping at the retailers or the supermarket, they would simply just jump from problem recognition and into purchase decision, and not really look further into post-purchase behavior, because if you buy what you bought last time, then okay, it's probably working for you. So depending on the process and the different buying situations, we need to take that into account when we are planning on how to set out our strategy and our marketing mix. And then there's one extra little thing that we need to look into in order to understand the buying behavior. And this is also to understand that we have different kinds of buying roles and what kind of influence they have. So buying roles, what are they? Well, if we look at them and compare them to the problem recognition, information search, etc., means the buying process, we can see that the buying role of the initiator, well, we have to ask the question, who could be the initiator in buying a car? Well, it could be you, it could be your friend, it could be an advertisement where you are seeing a fancy car that you like to have. So the initiator can be different kinds of people, including yourself, that would help you to recognize the problem. The initiator could help you to search for information. The initiator could help you evaluate the alternatives, could maybe also help you make the purchase decision, and could also help you to have your post-purchase behavior, seeing, okay, how do I like this product? The point is that we need to identify who are the initiators in buying a specific product. Could be a car. Now, another buying role would be the influencer. Who could actually be the one influencing your buying process? And that's the question. If you buy a car, who would influence your buying process when you buy a car? Means who would influence your problem recognition? Who would influence your information search? Who would influence your evaluation of alternatives? Who would influence your purchase decision? And who would influence your post-purchase behavior? That's the question. And the decider, who is the decider? Is it you when you buy a car? Is it your wife? Is it your husband? Well, it all depends. But it is important when you start to market a product that you understand who's actually deciding who's going to buy, and that means who's making the purchase decision. And is the decider, if that is you, do you participate in the buying process from the problem recognition throughout all the phases and ending up buying the product, deciding on the product? Or are you just being the one who's deciding without going through these phases? So again, understanding these matters help us as a marketeer to understand what to do with our marketing mix. We also have a buyer, and we have the same issues here that we need to deal with, and we have a user. Who are the users? When do they participate, etc. So try to consider this. What kind of roles do you have when you buy groceries, when you buy a bike, when you buy a PC, when you buy other kinds of products? If you could try to evaluate that, then you would have a better understanding of what is your buying process and who's actually involved in that, and what kind of buying roles do different people have, and what kind of roles do you have. So, understanding the buying behavior is also to understand the different kinds of buying roles that we find with consumers, and therefore it's important for us to take a closer look and understand how is it that people react. And let us just shortly return to one of the first slides here, which is the stimuli, organism, and response. And we would look at it in this way, that from the environment we get lots of stimuli. We get marketing stimuli from other kind of competitors than our own company can stimulate the consumer with. We get general stimuli, and these stimuli is affecting the organism, in this case the consumer. And we need to remember that the consumer is also affected by the cultural settings, the social settings, the personal settings, psychological settings, and all of this has an influence on the way the consumer recognizes a problem. Search for information, evaluate the information, purchase, and having the purchase or post-purchase behavior here, and remembering that we have the different kinds of buying situations from Assaels. We would go through all of these 5 phases here, or maybe just a couple of them, depending on a complex buying situation, buying behavior, variety seeking, habit, etc. And all of this leads to a reaction of the consumer ending up choosing a specific product, a brand, where to buy, when to buy, and how much to buy. And that is, you could say, the essence of the consumer buying behavior, that we are going to understand how the process is taking place and what it all ends with, the reactions. And this ends this session of consumer buying behavior.